Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where you could say the Amiga came into its own in 1986, and for the next 10 years it was a bit of a powerhouse. And I thought it'd be fun to celebrate that by checking out my two favourite games for each of those amazing years, with a few rules to make it interesting. The first one is that it had to be playable on the original hardware, with some limited upgrades. The second, and this makes it more personal, is that it had to be a game that I played and owned in some way back in the day. Now this does mean there are a number of games that I missed out on, because either I didn't know about it or I could just never find them in the shops. Starting with 1986, I had to go with Defender of the Crown. By Massive Design Software and Cinemaware, this is possibly the most famous of the early Amiga games, and it showed off what that new hardware could do, as well it looks just lovely. And it was this that gave Cinemaware its direction for most of its life. Games with high production values that wowed when showed off, but might not have been the best game around. As the gameplay, at least in this original version, is a bit of a mixed bag. Now you have to take over areas and build an army that you'll use to invade, so you got some good strategy here. But these will typically trigger a bit of a mini-game, all of which are quite different, and can also take a bit of time to learn how to play correctly, as some of them require far more precision than you might expect. Now this was quite the unique game for the time, even if it might have put the graphics before the gameplay. Something that more than a few Amiga games got accused of over the years. Now I decided to start with 86, even though the Amiga did come out the year before, as it did take a year for the platform to find its feet. And this wasn't helped by the number of Atari ST ports that came along that didn't really push the hardware. But it was games like this that helped change all of that. Marble Madness by Atari and EA. Now this was an early arcade conversion, and an impressive one at that, as this looks spot on to the original, and it plays really well, and shows that EA were one of the Amiga's big early adopters, as they really seemed to believe in the machine. And with their later release of Deluxe Paint, they really cemented themselves as a company to watch. The game itself, well, it's very well ported. It supported joystick, mouse and various trackballs, so you could play it just like the arcade. It also sounds great. Well, some of the music can get a little grating, but that's the same as the arcade original. But some parts of this do indicate how early this was, as we get the system font for the menus. Something that we see far more of with PD games in the future. But then, when you're in game, you tend to forget all about that, as you try and guide that ball to the exit, while avoiding all the nasty traps and falls. In 1987 are attacking us with Pteropods by Ian Hetherington and Psygnosis. Now this is a bit of an odd title, and shows the early experimentation that was going on with the 16-bit machines. And part of that are these games that look nice, but are then in some ways overly complicated, which can result in some clunky gameplay. Now the game itself ends up being a bit like an advanced missile command, where you have to protect multiple bases and repairing them where possible. You'll also want to send out your drover to collect resources and trade with other locations, as you're going to need all that to be able to survive. Now all of this is presented in this first person view, with some lovely scrolling going on. And typically, there will be a lot for you to deal with right away, as you have to deal with the pteropods that will fly down and attack your bases. Now this isn't an easy game to get to grips with, as it doesn't really give you much time to really work this all out, as those pteropods, they will come in fast and start messing with you quickly. Now I will admit that I found it quite hard to pick games for this year, as there wasn't many that I'd actually played. But there are a few that I would probably want to go check out if I had the chance, like Ports of Call. The Sentinel by Jeff Crammond and Firebird. This is another port, but this time from the 8-bits. But the extra power of the Amiga makes this a much smoother experience, even if it doesn't do too much to improve the graphics, as it still looks a bit like an 8-bit game. But there are some improvements, like being able to use the mouse to look around. Now it's not quite the free look that we're used to now, but it does work. Now this year seemed to be quite big on its weird games, that take some working out, as we have to move our view around and then absorb the trees, which can be done by clicking on the ground square, not the tree itself. This will then give you more power and allow you to build boulders, as the goal is to raise ourselves up so we're higher than the Sentinel, and then absorb it, for it can do the same to us. The trick is that you can only move to squares if you're looking down on it. It's an odd but fun game that has a huge number of procedurally generated levels, making this a game that you could, and I did, play for ages. "1988 is abducting us with Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders. A game by the legendary LucasArts. Now this was my first real introduction into the adventure game genre, and I think it's a great one, even if it's not the easiest, or the best looking, but it has that early LucasArts charm with its weird legs. It's a game that spans the world and eventually beyond. The puzzles to start with aren't too bad, and there's so much that you can do and mess around with right away, some of which you won't really need until much later on, as you'll have to fly out and track down the two-headed squirrel that will lead you onto a quest to track down the literal girl of your dreams, and eventually you'll get to control multiple characters and even go to Mars. There are a few issues with the game, mostly down to the need to spend money to travel, which can quickly run dry when you don't know where you got to go, but thankfully the printed paper that came with the original game, I have the cheaply done budget release, gives you all sorts of hints and tips, but not in a direct fashion, which is really cool. Eliminator by Lionel and Hewson. Another odd choice, but I got this one with our Amiga and I played it so much. And while I think that something like Hostages that was released in the same year is the better game, the version I had would always crash on the last level, so it makes it a hard game for me to pick. As these are all really games that I would happily go back to and play again, and Eliminator is definitely one of those titles. From its rocking soundtrack to the fast moving road and the blasting action. This was such an amazing game to play, and it was one of the earliest that I played on the machine, and it just wowed me with the jumps and flipping to the ceiling. But it's not a forgiving game. It's very easy to get hit by an enemy, or just clip a wall and blow up. It also doesn't help that you have limited energy for your guns, so quite often you'll have to choose between upgrading your weapon or going for the ammo so you can continue. But when it all clicks and you manage to make it to the exit, oh, it's just simply amazing. "1989 jumps in with Treasure Island Dizzy by the Codemasters. Now this will shock people, as 1989 was really a banner year for the machine. There was Batman and Populous, and it came from the desert, but instead we have a Spectrum port of the famous Egg, but one that has the earwormiest bit of music ever made. And it's the one that has the brutal one life mechanic due to that maddeningly difficult inventory system and the snorkel. And even with all that, this is a game that I kept coming back to, as I really did just enjoy trying to solve all the puzzles and then attempting to collect all the gold coins. Well, before giving up and then using the flying cheat. Now this isn't the best game of the year, or even one of the better Dizzy games, with its cheap deaths that can come at you off the screen, but there is something about this one that I really just enjoy. Now I'm not going to try and justify my choice, or even try and change anyone else's opinion about the game, but sometimes the games that you enjoy aren't always the most well regarded ones. North and South by Infogrames. This is a game based on a Belgian comic, which was common for them to do, and that was called The Bluecoats. And it's that comic book charm that really comes through with the graphics, as well as all the little touches. Now a bit like Defender of the Crown, you have to pick your side and then try and take over the various territories. And you'll have to get into fights, where you'll have direct control over the armies. So there is a decent amount of strategy in this game. There's also various mini games that, while quite different and interesting, but these can be let down at times by the controls, as well as the AI, which can be extremely annoying at times, as it will try and constantly go for the stations, triggering that mini game over and over again. But the 2-player mode does make up for a lot of these issues. Now it really is interesting to look back at this year and realise how many classic games I missed out on. Now I was still a year out from getting our Amiga, and unless the game was still in the shops or on the budget labels, it wasn't always easy to get your hands on it. So for some of those older games, if you didn't get a pirated copy from a mate, then you weren't going to be getting the game. "1990 is blasting us with Turrican." From Manfred Trends and Rainbow Arts, this is another classic game that people think of as being an Amiga title, but it is one that was ported from the C64. But what a port Factor 5 did. It's just amazing. This was one of the games that helped popularise that gradient background, using the Amiga copper chip. But it's not just a nice looking game, there is also the amazing soundtrack. And incredibly, this actually plays as well as it looks, which wasn't always the case. But the levels are absolutely huge, with so many side areas for you to go off and explore. These might give you more gems or pods that you can use to upgrade your weapons, as you won't get too far with the basic pea shooter that you start with. Now because of its 8-bit roots, this one is not going to go easy on you. But you do have the laser whip that you can also upgrade, that's great at clearing out baddies, or you have the screen clearing super. Now this was one of the games that helped show the Amiga could do smooth and fast multi-directional scrolling, and it is a bit of a classic for a reason. Prince of Persia by Jordan Mechner and Domark. Now I had the Hit Squad version of the game, which at some point in its life got overwritten with a cracked version because it included cheats. And that was because this wasn't the easiest game, with its strict time limit and slightly trial and error gameplay, as a large part of the challenge of this game was working out where you were and where you were trying to go. Now this is not the best looking version of the game. I think we all know that the Amiga could have done better, as this appears of all things to be a port from the DOS version. But none of that really matters when you have this incredible adventure, as you step through traps, jump over huge pits, and end up in sword fights with various guards. And then you get the shock of creating a shadow version of yourself. Now there is some limited music, but it has some very chunky sound effects. Now I'm not sure I ever actually finished this game. I always got stuck later on in the title, but that didn't really matter as I kept coming back to it. "1991 is not responsible for Lemmings." From DMA Design and Psygnosis, this was easily the best game that we got in the Cartoon Classics pack, even if it was a slightly cut down version of the game as it was missing the intro. This is a famous game that I doubt I really have to go over, but any excuse to boot this up and play will be taken. Now this might have been ported to many other systems, but it's here on the Amiga with a mouse that it feels perfectly at home. The game could have been seen as the best advert for a mouse since Deluxe Paint, as its precision makes the game so much easier, as you can quickly select the icons and then the lemming that you want them to be triggered on, because guiding them all to the exit is our only real goal here. But the puzzles get complex or just mean in some of the later levels, and so you really will have to be on the ball. Now this is very much one of those almost perfect games, from the graphics to the animations of those little folk to the cheerful music playing in the background. It could have done with the speed up option which some of the much later ports got, but this got something that a lot of the other ones didn't, which was its 2-player mode. I never got as much of a chance to play this as I would have liked, but it was great fun when I did. Another World by Eric Chahi and Delphine. This was a game that just blew my mind when I first witnessed it. A friend got this for their machine, and we spent ages replaying that first level just trying to work out how to complete it. The gameplay is extremely trial and error, but when you fail, it tends to be in a style that you don't really mind it, at least at first, as you'll get to enjoy watching those cutscenes. But when it's the 20th time, and it took quite a while to get to that point, yeah, it can get a little annoying. But then it opens up further in, and you have to work out these amazing sequences of events. It's just awesome. Now when you do know how to finish the game, it's not the longest around, even if some of the bits can be a bit difficult to complete. And the gameplay was extended in some of the later ports, but the original one on the Amiga is still a thing of beauty, And that intro, it's still stunning. And that ending, wow, if you've not gotten to the ending of this game, you really should do, because that is not an ending you'd expect. (1992) is Awakening the Dreamer on Dune. This is from Cryo and Virgin Games, and it's the only licensed game in this list, but what a license and what a game. A hybrid of a movie and a book with some of their own interpretations added in as well, as they tell a version of the story where the Harkonnens never left Arrakis. So it's up to you, Paul Atreides, to manage this, in this part adventure, part strategy game, where you have to travel around the planet, finding and recruiting the Fremen to your side, as you'll need them to mine the spice, and then train up as soldiers, or even later on, attempt them to green the planet. All presented in this first person view with some absolutely stunning artwork, and the music, oh yeah, the music in this game is just wonderful. And as you go, the story will organically unfold around you, as you'll have to then deal with the Emperor, who will demand more and more spice. But in this Dune, that ends up being a finite supply. And if you take too long, then bad things will happen to you. Flashback. Delphine is back, but with an originally designed and developed game. The CD-ROM game on a disc was the promise, and they delivered. This is easily one of the nicest looking and animated games on this list, but it also has the gameplay to back all of that up, as it's a cinematic platformer, which means not only do you need to fight your way across this alien planet, but you'll also need to find items and solve puzzles. None of them are particularly complex, it's more about trying to work out how to get the safe route around everywhere. As well, pretty much everything will try and kill you. Now you do have a shield and a gun, but that won't help you against a long fall or a gas trap. It's amazing how long I end up being stuck at the start of the second level, as it wasn't until I got my hand on a budget release of the game that I learned the secret joystick combo from the manual, which I didn't have beforehand. It's the one that lets you do that special extra long jump that I swear that you couldn't work out, and it's a bit like a hidden anti-piracy check. (1993) settles down with The Settlers. Developed and published by Blue Byte, this was the game that I played the demo of almost as much as the full game, as I had that demo for a very long time before I finally got myself a copy. It's a game that you can just start up and then take your time with. There is no need to rush, as the game will not be rushed, as you'll have to set up your buildings and the supply chains to turn that lone castle into a massive settlement, where you'll have to grow crops to feed cattle, to turn into sausages so you can then feed a miner, who will then provide you with minerals you'll need to make iron, that can be then forged into swords and shields and tools, all so you can then attack and defend against the other races that are also on the map. But everything that you build has to be moved around by the settlers, who will walk up and down the paths that you provide. Which means everything happens at its own pace, and if you try to expand too quickly, then you're going to have to wait for a few new settlers to be born before they can go take up those roads, and that can take a little while. which does mean that the 2-player games that I used to play can last quite a while. But it just gave you time to, well, chat with your mates and listen to music. Zool 2 by the Warp Factory and Gremlin, a sequel that took everything that was good from the original, and yes, I'm one of those that thought it was good, and made it all better. The music absolutely kicks ass, the multiple characters are well done with alternative paths for Zool and Zoos, and the levels are large and interesting, and the moveset was also increased, so you can now more easily climb the walls, and there's also a spinning jump if you run at a wall. And if you manage to find the power up, there's also a charge attack. The only downside is that none of the levels are really as complex as the music ones from the original. And the minigame, which is this breakout style title using Zune, is a little bit awkward. I much prefer the mini shoot 'em up. They were really creative when they came up with the various themes for the levels, and I do enjoy them all massively. Now this was one of those games I just knew I had to get when I spotted the screenshots and the reviews. And booting this up, with its very sudden title music, woke everyone up that morning. "1994 heads off into space with K240 by Gremlin Graphics. Now we have another simulation game, but this time it's in the future, on asteroids. Now this is a bit city builder, as you have to place buildings and set up some very basic chains. But this is mostly in aid of mining, as what you really want is the ores that you can find on these asteroids, as you can sell them for credits, and because it's partly a strategy game, you'll also have to use that to build fleets of spaceships, as this isn't a friendly sector of space, and you'll have to defend yourself and eventually take over all the area. But it's not just ships at your disposal, there are also missiles, with a wide range of them that you can build and then deploy against the enemy. Add in a simple economy and having to deal with the needs of your workers, and you have quite the game here, as you'll also want to go out and try and find new asteroids to colonize, so there is a lot to do. I have some fond memories of this one, as I had another mate who lent this to me to work it out, as they got it but then had no idea how to play, and it ended up quickly becoming one of my own personal favourites, and I had to get myself a copy of it as well. Cannon fodder. Sensible software at their best. This was yet another title that went on to do well on the consoles, even if again this was one that was best played with a mouse. Plus the Amiga version was one of the few that had the full intro with those lyrics, which I think we can all agree was the most important thing here. The game itself was another strategy game, but this time we are in charge of a small number of soldiers, and we have to complete a number of objectives and missions. Now it might be as simple as take out all the enemy on a map, but you might also have to take out all their buildings, with the levels getting far more complex and challenging as you go, with there being a bit of a spike early on as well. If you know it, you know it. Now as you continue through the game, you'll get attached to those little guys, with them all being individually named. But that does come at a cost, as when they die, death is permanent. And a lost soldier will be given a grave on the hill, and a new recruit will take their place. So you better play well if you want to keep Jules and Jops around for quite some time. "1995 is blowing up the bridge so we can't return to Worms," which was by Team 17. The game that would go on to hit just about every platform moving forward, and for the longest time pretty much support an entire studio. But at the start we had this amazing game, and from that first custom demos in the magazines I knew I had to own it. As a good time was had by all, well, until someone like, well, me, would go dark side and would try to attack you from deep within a hill. Now the simple goal is to try and wipe out all of the other team's worms, and that was a lot of fun to do, with the environments and the wind being just as much of a pain to deal with as the other players. Now even playing against the AI, this was a good time. But it was with mates that this came into its own, with the huge amounts of charm and personality being injected into those tiny sprites. With a ridiculous array of weapons that you could use, you could always find something interesting to attack the enemy with. Now add in the randomly generated levels, making a different map each time you played, this was just awesome. And we also had a lot of fun with the originally Amiga exclusive feature of making custom maps, as you could just draw something in Deluxe Paint and then import it into the game. Timekeepers.
Nuclear devices have been placed in 4 very
Developed and published by Vulcan. This is their typical style at the time, as it's a top-down puzzle game, where you have to guide the soldiers from their starting point to the exit, very much like Lemmings. But it being top-down, you'll have to spend more time laying down routes for them to follow. Although typically you'll start off by trying to find your way to the exit, which will involve sending 1 or 2 of your little people on ahead to try and open doors, trigger traps, and open up paths so the rest can follow. The graphics are detailed and everything moves nicely enough. The puzzles themselves are complex and get even more tricky as you progress, which made this a bit of an outlier for this year, as this is when the FPSs really tried to take over for the Amiga, and most of those required AGA hardware. Now there was one that I played back in the day, Death Mask, but I can tell you, this is a much better game than that one. And there we have it, 10 years and 20 games that I've been playing way too much over the years and will continue to play long into the future. Now I hope you enjoyed this one, as I really did, as it was so much fun to go back and play a few of these games again. So I'd like to thank you for getting this far. Now I'd also want to thank my amazing Patreons, who not only get to see their name on the screen right now, but also got to see this video a week early and advert free. And if that sounds good to you, then you can join them for free. There will be links in the description. And until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was a real time capsule, and this was Goldfish on Games.